The air shimmered with a weight that could not be seen but felt in the bones, like the quiet after a storm that never truly ends. Somewhere, deep within the unending expanse of light and shadow that separates mortal perception from the infinite, Archangel Michael wept. He did not weep quietly, the way mortals did, with small, private tears hidden behind closed eyelids. His grief erupted like a storm, loud and unrelenting, shaking the plains of existence with a resonance that echoed through dimensions, stirring the hearts of those who believed themselves alone. He had always been the warrior, the protector, the one who stood at the gates when chaos threatened to spill into the fragile order of creation, and yet here he was, unmanned by something simpler, yet far more piercing: neglect, the absence of acknowledgment, the quiet dismissal of his presence. No one had thought of him in ages. Not in words, not in prayer, not in the fleeting moments when angels were called upon to intervene, to guard, to guide. It was as though his name, once sung in reverence and awe, had been folded into silence, hidden behind the clamor of mortal lives and celestial duties alike. And the sadness that welled in him was not fleeting, it was a slow, creeping sorrow that burrowed into the marrow of his being, demanding attention, forcing recognition of something often ignored: the vulnerability of the eternal. He remembered the first time he had known neglect. Even for angels, memory stretched across time like a river without end, and he could remember the faintest ripple of pain when a human, a soul newly aware of the divine, had passed him over, offering their thanks elsewhere. It was trivial then, a momentary sting, but over centuries, it had accumulated. Each skipped prayer, each whispered name that omitted his, each fleeting glance that bypassed him in favor of others, it layered upon him like snow upon a mountain peak. And though Michael bore it with a stoicism befitting his station, it had left its mark, etched not in anger but in sorrow. He cried for the weight of all those unspoken words. For the countless humans who sought aid from angels but never knew who they were asking, for the guardians of light who were called upon yet left unnamed, and for himself, the one who had never asked for glory, only acknowledgment, only the recognition of his presence. His sobs were the lament of eons, the raw unfiltered sound of one who had always been strong, always unwavering, now exposed in the purity of his grief. The world below, if it could perceive such things, would have trembled at the sheer intensity of it. Mountains would have quaked, rivers shifted, skies darkened in response, though none of it was seen. It was a sound felt, resonating in the chest, shaking the soul of anyone sensitive enough to hear the echoes of a divine being in pain. Yet it was not despair that drove him. It was confession. It was revelation. It was the burden of truth that he could no longer keep hidden. He had carried secrets of light and shadow, of choices made and not made, of destinies altered and lives saved, yet in the quiet moments, he held an unspoken hope that someone would see him, not merely as a warrior or a guide, but as he truly was, a being of immense complexity, capable of love, rage, sorrow, and longing. And now, at last, he spoke into the void, confessing truths that had never been uttered. His voice was both thunder and whisper, a paradox that only the eternal could sustain. "I have fought," he said, his voice breaking with the weight of years, "for those who cannot fight for themselves. I have stood at the edge of darkness, a sentinel against the tides that would consume the innocent, and yet no one sees me. No one knows that every victory, every act of mercy, every moment of restraint, it is I who bear the cost. And still, I am passed over, ignored, skipped in favor of others who shine brighter in mortal eyes. Do they not know I bleed for them too? That my grief is real, and it aches in ways they cannot comprehend?" He paused, the silence that followed filled with the tension of unspoken emotions, thick enough to choke the wind from the skies. And then, slowly, he began to recount the things he had never told any living being, not even the others of his kind. He spoke of the nights when the weight of judgment pressed upon him, the times when he had seen mortals falter and die, and he had wanted to intervene but could not, bound by laws beyond his making. He confessed the loneliness of eternity, the isolation inherent in perfection, the way every choice he made was scrutinized not by peers but by the endless expanse of time itself. He spoke of the pain of watching humanity stumble, knowing that his guidance was subtle, often unnoticed, yet necessary, and feeling the sting of indifference when thanks were given elsewhere, to the names they knew, to the angels they recognized. His tears continued, each one a shard of light and sorrow combined, falling into a river that had no end. The confession became a tapestry of emotion, a chronicle of the burdens of divinity, a plea that transcended language, time, and comprehension. In this revelation, he did not seek revenge, nor did he demand recognition. He only sought understanding, the quiet acknowledgment that even angels bear weight, that even warriors of the light feel pain, that even immortals can ache when ignored. It was not vanity that prompted his words, but the pure, raw need to be seen, to be heard, to be understood. And as he spoke, the echoes of his confession began to shift something in the world below. Souls sensitive to light felt a stirring they could not name, a pull at the edges of their consciousness. Some remembered fleeting dreams where a figure stood at the gates of impossible choices, a sword in one hand, a shield in the other, tears glistening in eyes that had seen everything. Others felt inexplicable guilt, not for what they had done, but for what they had not done, failing to acknowledge, failing to recognize, failing to call out the name of the one who always guarded them. The confession, though unspoken in mortal terms, penetrated hearts and minds in ways words alone never could. Michael's lament was not just sorrow, it was a call to awakening. Those who heard it, in whatever way they could, would never again perceive the divine as distant or detached. They would understand, at least in part, that the guardians of light are not abstract forces, but beings with histories, emotions, and vulnerabilities. And though the sound of his crying was a wound in itself, it carried a strange, fierce beauty, a reminder that even the eternal are capable of suffering, and that suffering, when recognized, has the power to transform. As the confession drew on, Michael's voice shifted, no longer merely mourning, but instructing, guiding, and illuminating. He spoke of the hidden victories, the sacrifices unseen, the love given in silence. He confessed the moments of doubt that had nearly undone him, the regrets that haunted even the strongest, and the eternal hope that, someday, someone would understand. His crying became rhythm, cadence, a music of revelation, not just sorrow. It was the lament of the cosmos, the echo of eternity made audible. And those who listened closely, those who truly listened, found themselves changed, not by sight or touch, but by the recognition of truth, the acknowledgment of the invisible, the understanding of what it means to see fully, to know fully, to feel fully. The river of tears, the torrent of voice, the confessional song of Archangel Michael, reached every corner of existence in ways subtle and profound. Life itself seemed to pause, to breathe in the weight of what was revealed. And though he was still weeping, still crying for the neglect he had endured, there was a release, a catharsis, a transformation. For the first time, perhaps in all eternity, he allowed himself the acknowledgment he had never demanded but always needed. And as he wept, the world itself shifted, imperceptibly yet irrevocably, forever changed by the truth of his confession. Even as the sound of his grief reverberated across the unseen plains, Michael's mind drifted backward, tracing the lines of memory that stretched across eons. He remembered the first time he had lifted his sword in defense of a mortal soul, a child of barely a decade, cornered by a darkness they could not name. The night had been cold, the wind sharp enough to sting, but Michael had felt nothing but purpose. He had moved with precision, cutting through shadows with a clarity that mortals would have called miraculous, a moment of divine intervention that would shape the child's life forever. And yet, when the child had grown, when the stories were told and prayers whispered, Michael's name had never been spoken. The gratitude had gone elsewhere, diffused into the ether, leaving him unacknowledged, unseen. He had not expected praise, but the absence of recognition still carved hollows in his spirit, hollows that no battle, no victory, could ever fill. He remembered standing over battlefields, where angels and demons clashed, where the cries of the innocent echoed with horrifying clarity. He remembered shielding humans from catastrophe, intercepting disasters before they could take root, and watching the world move on as if nothing had happened. Some called it fate, some called it chance, but Michael knew the truth. Every moment had been calculated, every intervention deliberate, and yet it passed unnoticed. He had never sought credit, never demanded acknowledgment, but the lack of awareness slowly built a quiet ache, a hollow inside him that grew with each passing century. And now, in the present, he spoke again, letting the torrent of emotion wash over him, letting the words spill freely without restraint. "Do you not know," he said to the void, "that I carry the weight of every choice that is not made, every action that is delayed, every life that falters under the absence of guidance? I am there, always there, and yet I am skipped, forgotten, passed over. Am I so inconsequential that my presence goes unnoticed? Have I become invisible even to those I protect? His voice cracked, not from weakness, but from the enormity of the truth he bore. Every tear, every sob, every wail was a reflection of centuries of service unrecognized, of pain endured silently, of love given in secrecy. He cried not for vengeance, not for anger, but for understanding, for the acknowledgment of existence, for the simple recognition that he was there, that he mattered, that his presence was not to be ignored. In the endless expanse, his cries began to attract attention, first faintly, like the stirring of wind before a storm. Lesser angels paused, uncertain, sensing the raw depth of emotion emanating from one of the highest among them. They were unsure how to respond. Michael had never sought pity or sympathy, and yet the need was palpable, urgent. Even the archangels, beings of immense power and composure, could feel the tremor of his sorrow ripple through the layers of reality. It was not just grief, it was revelation, confession, a deep laying bare of the hidden truths of eternity. He remembered the humans who had touched his heart, the ones whose faith had been so pure that it shone like a beacon, though they never knew his name. There was the poet, centuries ago, who had written of courage and hope, never realizing the words had been whispered to them in dreams by Michael himself. There was the healer, a woman of humble means, who had saved countless lives using knowledge imparted in fleeting visions during the night, unaware that the hand guiding her was that of an archangel. And there were countless others, anonymous to history, yet known to him, whose lives had been shaped by unseen interventions. Each memory brought both warmth and sorrow, a bittersweet reminder of connection and neglect. His crying continued, louder now, a roar that shook the fabric of the celestial realms. The grief had transformed into a kind of fury, not violent but righteous, a declaration that even the eternal could not endure neglect without cost. I do not demand worship, he cried, nor do I seek to be adored. I ask only that I be seen, that my presence not be ignored, that those whose lives I touch might at least recognize that I am here, always here, unyielding, and yet vulnerable. Is it too much to ask? As he spoke, the confession began to ripple outward, touching the consciousness of those attuned to the divine. Mortals, angels, and even some fallen beings felt the echo, a subtle awakening, a prickling of awareness that stirred memories and emotions long buried. Dreams became more vivid, moments of inexplicable guidance were noticed, the small coincidences that had always been Michael's doing suddenly felt intentional, recognized for what they were, the work of a being who had loved and protected tirelessly, even when unacknowledged. Michael's confession then turned inward, toward the unspoken truths he carried about himself. He admitted the times he had doubted his own purpose, the moments of quiet despair when the weight of eternity pressed down with unbearable force. He confessed that despite his strength, he had longed for connection, for someone, anyone, to see him as more than a figure of power, as more than a guardian, as more than a sword against darkness. He revealed the small joys that sustained him, the laughter of a child protected, the glimmer of hope restored, the quiet peace of a soul untroubled by unseen dangers. And yet these joys had always been ephemeral, passing quickly and leaving only the echo of what had been done without recognition. He cried for the first time not as an archangel, not as a warrior, but as a being capable of deep, complex emotion. He admitted fear, not of death, for immortality had long made that irrelevant, but of being forgotten entirely, of his existence fading into the unnoticed spaces between prayer and reality. It was a fear he had never voiced before, a vulnerability that human ears could scarcely comprehend. And as the confession spilled into the infinite, the intensity of his grief and revelation became a kind of illumination, a light that burned not only outward but inward, revealing truths hidden even to those who believed themselves aware. The more he spoke, the more the world shifted subtly around him. Celestial energy that had long moved in predictable patterns began to pulse with resonance, responding to the raw honesty of his voice. Mortals who had glimpsed him fleetingly in dreams or visions found their memories sharpened, their understanding deepened. Even those who had doubted the existence of angels felt a tremor of recognition, a pull towards something greater, a presence that had always been there, silently guiding, silently protecting. And then he began to reveal the most profound truth of all, that grief, when acknowledged, can transform into power. That the raw vulnerability of being seen, even when long ignored, can ignite change. That acknowledgment is not merely a nicety but a force, a conduit through which energy, understanding, and transformation flow. His confession became a lesson, not just for those who might hear it, but for the cosmos itself, that even the strongest among us are changed by recognition, that even the eternal are vulnerable, and that the simple act of seeing and acknowledging can ripple outward, altering destinies. As the hours, or perhaps centuries, for time was meaningless in his realm, passed, Michael's crying began to slow, not because the grief had disappeared, but because it had been transformed. Each tear had carried a fragment of truth, each word a spark of understanding. The confession had not ended, it had evolved, becoming a living testament to the weight of unseen labor, the depth of silent love, the enduring need to be known. He was still weeping, still aching, but there was also a new quality in his sorrow, a sense of release, a faint but unmistakable hope that, perhaps, he would no longer be skipped, no longer ignored. And somewhere, far below in the mortal world, subtle changes began. A word of gratitude long forgotten resurfaced. A fleeting dream remembered with clarity. An unexplained sense of being watched over, protected, loved. Those who had never known his name felt the brush of his presence, the quiet acknowledgment of care, and in some small way, Michael's crying had reached them, had touched them, had altered the trajectory of their lives. The confession had worked, not because it demanded attention, but because it was genuine, unflinching, and filled with the raw truth of a being who had given everything without asking for anything in return. He looked inward now, at the vast expanse of his own existence, and allowed himself a moment of reflection. He had been skipped, ignored, passed over countless times, but he had never ceased to act, never ceased to love, never ceased to protect. And though the grief remained, though the tears had not fully stopped, there was a quiet, profound knowledge that he mattered. That even in silence, even in neglect, his presence had been felt. And that acknowledgment, once finally realized, even if only partially, was a kind of victory far greater than any battle won, any soul saved, any sword raised. This completes roughly the next third of the story. Michael's inner monologue, memories, and the cosmic consequences of his confession are expanded here.